evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tabernacle Township workshop meeting for April 8th, 2019. Please stand for flag salute.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Sunshine notice, this meeting is called pursuant to the Open Public Meetings Law. This meeting of April the 8th, 2019 was sent to the Central Record, Burlington County Times, and Courier Post. Posted on the bulletin board in Town Hall and has remained continuously posted as required notices under the statute. In addition, a copy of this notice is and has been available to the public and is on file in the office of the municipal clerk. We have roll call. Ms. Brown. Here. Mr. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Moore.
Here.
Mr. Yates.
Here.
Mayor Barton.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stein. Before we get started, our next scheduled meeting, our committee meeting, is April 22nd, which is Easter Monday. And I had received some feedback and some suggestions to possibly move that meeting to the 29th, which is also a Monday. That's the last Monday in April. Is there any reason from anyone that, or professionals, that we can or can't do that?
Okay.
Okay. Peter, you okay?
Yep.
I'm okay with the date. My assumption is going to be if we introduce a budget at that meeting, we're going to either have to move the May meeting or create a special meeting for May for the adoption of the budget. Because there's got to be 28 days between introduction and adoption.
Okay. And in May, I believe we only have one meeting on the 6th, is that correct?
No.
No? To the 20th?
20th.
And that doesn't give you 28 days, right?
No.
We've got the ability to be able to schedule a special meeting to do the budget anyway if we wanted to. I mean, that's the nice,
Yeah,
flexibility is nice, that's the point.
It just needs to be 28 days between introduction and adoption.
Okay. Well,
Minimum of 28 days.
well, if we're going to move one, it sounds like we would have to move two, right? If we would move the 22nd to the 29th, we would have to move the 20th to 28th.
8th.
Any objections to that? What was that? The 22nd to the 29th.
Yeah, I got that. I'm good with that.
And then the May 20th to the 28th, which is a Tuesday.
Fifth week of the month, you probably could.
Yeah, that should be fine, right?
That gives you 28 days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Someone want to make a motion to that effect? Okay. Second.
I'll second.
Roll call.
Ms. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Yates.
Yes.
Mayor Barton.
Yes. So Sean, you'll advertise accordingly, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your cooperation. Okay, our big agenda item tonight, before we get into a roundtable, is our budget. And so we've got to build a consensus tonight on our budget and get something that we can move forward with. Rodney, do you want to start?
Well, basically, at the last workshop, I told you that I could drop the tax increase down to a 2-cent tax increase. My intention was to just use additional surplus to get to that, because we do have the surplus right now. Because of things that we did in 2018, the one-time items, which were selling property, things like that. And I don't think it would be detrimental to the township on the whole. Yeah, but that was what I suggested at the last workshop meeting. As far as anything else, it's your questions to me, really.
Okay. So we had some questions posed to us, Rodney.
Mm-hmm. Would you like me to go down that list?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
You're talking about the list from Kathy Burke.
Yes.
Okay, item number 1, which talks about the merit committee, other expenses has an increase of $4,000. Those additional expenditures were the possibility of purchasing iPads or some type of electronic device for the committee members so that we don't have all this paper all the time and that we can communicate through those means. Item number 2, the clerk's salary wages has an increase of $26,250 for part-time clerical, $25,000, and assuming increases for 2019. Yes. What's the proposed hours of the new staff person and the hourly wage? What did we calculate that at? I think we were looking at 20 hours a week.
Yeah.
24.
1875 is what our current salary ordinance proposes.
We're going to again.
1875.
Can't hear you.
1875. You get that?
I got that.
20 to 24 hours.
It's the gentleman to your left who are more softly spoken.
Clerk other expenses, the increase of $26,800. Most of that increase is $25,000 has been set aside for the beginning to digitize the historical records and the records of the township. That's, I believe, just a starting point. You know,
We expect it to be more money than that.
finance salary and wages, a 20% increase of $6,500. The majority of that is we have Kim Smith is currently in the classes to become a QPA, Qualified Purchasing Agent, which is going to help the township with what they need to go out to bid and things like that. She's going to expect a pay increase or stipend for those additional requirements. And the remainder of that is now that I'm a certified municipal finance officer, I was requesting some type of bump as well. Legal has a $13,000 increase. Our original reasoning for increasing legal was the possibility of going out and getting special legal support for Oprah cases. Engineering increased $26,500. Explanation needing additional funds for NJDOT grant. This explanation is understood. So it's not only the DOT, but it's what's the Community Development Block Grant funds.
And we have a number of buildings that we're working on that will need some additional work on that's already been allotted in previous bond ordinances. So.
But there's, especially with those grants though, there's certain engineering requirements that are not covered under the grant agreements. Correct, Dan?
Correct.
Public safety salary and wages, township committee informed the public that they would not be replacing the public safety director. The thing is yes, we left the line item in there for what was originally approved to be paid to Arch Liston. If the committee decides in July or in August or November that they want to now appoint somebody as public safety director, you need a line item that has money in it to do that. You can't, if there's no line item, you can't you can't hire anybody. So if that one wants to be reduced, that's your discretion at that. Like I said, right now it's just in there with what was approved for the prior director, which was $12,000. Last year's was only 10 because he was not there at the beginning of the year. Number 8 is the same question as number 7, so we'll move on. Aid to Volunteer Ambulance Company, $16,000 increase. What's the justification? This is what is required for the balance billing that is in the contract. Historical amounts of the unpaid amounts or the balance billing has been usually about $28,000 to $30,000 a year. Garbage and trash removal appropriation is the same as the prior year, however, only $373 was expended. What that $373 does not have was the December bill that was not received until January, so there's been another $19,373 charged to that. So, being conservative, you would need to plan for increases. So that's why the budget remained at $420. Recreation OE has a $1,500 increase. I believe it is time to see if TAA can be self-sufficient. Well, TAA does not get any money from the township as far as this line item goes. All of these increases are based on current programs, being the
The seniors, the dinner, senior dinner, the senior bus trips, Memorial Day parade, and the tree lighting ceremony.
So is a $1,500 considered just an incremental increase for those events?
We expect a little more increase in the tree lighting ceremony for tent rental that we took out of probably buildings and grounds last year. So we're trying to put that in there.
electric has an increase of $24,000. Well, that's not a correct statement. The line item's $24,000 last year, $24,000 this year. Municipal court has an increase of $21,520. Why and what revenue is projected for potential shared services with Woodland? The court other expenses, the $21,520, the entire year's worth of rent payment due to Woodland Township is in there, which was, I believe, $14,400. And the other items are just really expectations of having that second location and or not staffing it, but equipping it and things like that, things that we will not get from the AOC. As far as the revenue projected, yes, we expect revenue to come in with that. Right now, we don't know what that amount is going to be because it's going to be totally dependent upon when we do this. You know, the expenses are not going to happen either if we don't do it, you know, if we do it in May, if we do it in August, it's going to change. So if you want to reduce that, knowing that it's now, we're into April and we don't have an agreement yet when that is actually going to take place.
We're pretty close. I can talk to that after we get through these questions if you want.
Okay. But the revenue, the revenue that was budgeted is very conservative, and it's based on just the revenue that we collected for Tabernacle during the 18th. Any revenues that we will collect will go back into our surplus, you know, the surplus that we're really using to balance this budget. Construction salary and wages shows an increase of 5.45%, increase of $8,350. And why? Well, there's the 2% for the current department, but it's also, as we discussed at the last meeting, the need for part-time help, part-time inspector to do fire inspection. And number 16, I believe the township staff and committee need to evaluate the 2019 capital plan to include necessities to cut back on the down payment needed for the capital improvement fund. So yes, the capital improvement fund budget in here has $65,000, which is the amount that would be required for the 5% down payment if your ordinance was $1.3 million, which is approximately what we did in 2018. So that went through all those questions.
Okay, thank you. So you have any comments on this budget?
I believe we covered the anticipated costs for this coming year based on either expenses last year or anticipated increase in costs based on our different projects that are moving forward, such as the fire marshal's office, such as the court being moved to Woodland. All those are anticipated costs that we need to cover. Unfortunately, we're not able to anticipate the additional revenue because we didn't have it in last year's budget. So, but we're looking at working with the courts this year in the spring We went through the process of interviewing for a deputy court administrator. We were able to convince the court to reduce the hours to between 10 and 14 instead of between 20 and 24. To move forward, we have a successful candidate we wish to make an offer to, and I guess the courts will allow us to move forward once we make that offer. And, Peter was in discussion with the judge earlier this week, or late last week. So we would like to be able to do that and then have for the regular meeting the appointment to start somewhere around mid-May to get ready for the anticipated court move of July the 1st.
So we had a meeting with the assignment judge, and it was indicated that, in fact, they would approve the merger based upon the hours that were proposed, the office and courtroom facilities, based on the parking, based on their analysis of all of the parameters associated with that future relationship, on the condition that that the offer to the employee be accepted. And so they would indicate that if we could move forward on that and make that offer and obtain that acceptance, that they would be able to provide their approval to go live on July 1st. If we're unable to do that tonight, then they'll still be waiting to hear, and they may have to extend the effective date.
Peter, who was it you met with?
I spoke in a teleconference with Judge Covert, who's the new assignment judge taking over for Judge Bookbinder,
Okay.
and the solicitor for Woodland Township.
Okay.
We were on the line, and Amy Chack of the Municipal Division.
Okay. I thought that the, and maybe I just misheard this, but I thought that the income, or the rent payment was $1,000 a month. Did I miss that? I thought, when we negotiated initially, I thought it was $1,000, so it was a nice even number.
No. It
So
was
what is it?
You agreed to
$12,000 a year.
$1,200 a month.
Okay. I could have sworn it was $12,000 a year, $1,000 a month, but.
So the committee has to feel comfortable that it's in the financial benefit to the township to go forward, because these relationships take some while to unwind as well. So if you were to go backwards and do something different, you'd go through the same rigmarole, if you will, to get it approved to come back, and there would be some delay and some issue there. So
I believe some of the expenses though, like this part-time or this deputy, they're pushing for us to hire that deputy no matter what, whether we go or not, because we don't have currently anyone when Margaret is on vacation or out sick or anything else, that they don't like when we close our court.
we didn't have any discussion on that, but that's probably true. They want the court to maintain open hours during the hours that it's advertised to be open. They obviously want the court to be accessible to the public as possible. So I understand that there are a number of different issues here. One is the future costs associated potentially with increasing staff irrespective of any merger. There's future potential increased costs associated with this facility and improvements to the facility, which could ultimately be ordered, and also a future cost that has to be considered. And so, it's a totality of circumstances. It's not, I guess, strictly limited to whether or not it'll be a cost benefit to the township, but taking those other factors into consideration, it may, in the long run, be a cost benefit, but in the short term, I'm not sure where those numbers fall.
Short-term numbers are that it'll be an expense this first year. I've got the administrator in Woodland to agree to sit down and look at this after a year and see where we are with all expenses, and see if we can make some adjustments if we need to. We may not need to. The volume may cover it. They are presently right now about 2/3 of the volume of our court. So based on that, we should get some additional revenue out of all that. So that's where we look to be at a better place in the year.
as a state police community served by the state police, you don't get any of the fines and costs, which makes running the court a challenge. You get your $33 in court costs, you don't get any of the fines. You don't even get any cost revenue sharing of those fines, is my understanding, Rodney. It's court
Correct.
costs
That's
only.
correct.
Cost only.
Yeah, and so, you know, that makes financing the court a challenge, but probably not as much of a challenge as financing a police department, so.
Yeah, in 2018, our revenues were 36,000 here. So if they're 2/3, that'd be another 24,000. So,
The other component we haven't really touched on here, but I know that was part of the discussion when we initially went to Woodland, was that Bass River is going to be in the same position soon, whereas they may be looking for other options. So this opportunity for us in the first year, I think, as Doug mentioned, I think it makes a lot of sense to look at in the year. But I think it allows us an opportunity for expansion potentially down the road with other municipalities. Just something to think about down the road. Rod, you'd mentioned about the income forecast was for only Tabernacle.
what we put in the budget as a budgeted revenue.
That's what I thought, okay.
It's a conservative number based on what we collected in Tabernacle in 18.
So Rodney, 166% of that revenue is, what did you say, 50?
Well, it'd be, roughly 54,000.
And the.
Or, no, 60,000.
60,000. And the expenses, do we have an estimate as to what we think those expenses
Right now, we're
will be?
budgeting our court expenses. As soon as I find my line item. Right now, we're budgeting court expenses we're budgeting for court expenses to be 150.
150,000. And
In 2018, our budgeted expenses were 91,
against revenue of
36.
36. Yeah,
Courts are not a moneymaker, they're not even a break even.
absolutely. And so that point needs to be made. At the same time, a lot of times the shared service agreement, the expectation is it's going to end up, saving money, but sometimes it serves other purposes. In this case, it would be to avoid potential investments in this building that would be necessitated, and also providing a higher quality of service, as something you said for that
Well,
as well.
part of the other expenses increases for the court is the increased cost of having state police being in your building for security. They've raised their hourly rates of what we have to pay. So we're budgeting for $21,000 to pay for state police coverage.
And you do that year to year now, but they're increasing that cost.
They're increasing the rates.
They notified us in some regard in that way.
Mhm.
So our expense would go up whether we stay here or we go there. We're just trying to bring in a little more revenue to try to offset it as best we can.
And again, it's a first year endeavor, so we're trying to throw items in the budget that we may need, we may not need, and it can be canceled at the end of the year or, flow back into the surplus that's really funding it to begin with.
So we're going to make sure that the contract is cancelable on a certain amount of notice and that you can withdraw from it. The only problem there is you need to get that municipal division involved, and they have to go ahead and pass, bless whatever the plan is for the then delivery of the service, and that gets involved in going back and forth with them, and that could end up taking some time. So it could take a little while to unwind from it, and that's all the point I want to make.
Yeah, and as I said with the explanation of the public safety director, if you don't have the appropriation there, you can't spend the money. So if you come down to something that's a need and you don't have money available, then you can't do it unless it affects the health, safety, and welfare for declaring an emergency.
money every year, you lose a substantial amount of money.
It all depends on the cases that come through. You know, as Doug said, we've had years that, you know, we've earned, you know, we've had revenue of $60,000 against your expenses of
$90,000.
90.
Yeah.
You know, so you didn't lose as much, but you also can't depend on that. You know, you can't go out, you can't go call the state police and tell them to go write more tickets.
No, doesn't matter anyway, because it's court costs that you're receiving the
Correct.
revenue from. And you have to provide a service, it's part of civic government, I mean, you gotta provide a court. You gotta have a court, so. It's a challenge for the rural municipalities, it really is. And it's a challenge actually even for the municipalities that have their own police department. Some have very large police departments and they create a significant amount of revenue. They get most of, I think, half of the fine income as well as the court costs.
Correct, they get half.
Yeah, and so, there are some municipalities where it's a revenue producer in some towns.
Only covers their court costs. It doesn't cover the police that had to write the tickets.
This is true. Well, it covers the court costs, it doesn't cover the entire cost of the police. That's always the case, I would say, yeah.
So yes,
If you're gonna load the cost with the cost of the entire cost of the police department, then it's always, the court's never gonna pay for the police
court,
department.
no.
Okay, so we've gotten off on a little tangent here about another issue, which is the court with Woodland Township. And it's been a good conversation. It's a conversation that needs to take place. We need to understand what the numbers are and what the risk going into this. But I would ask the committee, do we want to build a consensus to put this on the agenda not on the agenda, put it on the agenda for the next committee meeting in the form of a resolution to vote on this to move this forward?
Well, where do we stand with the fire department budget? How will that affect the overall budget?
That's not going to change from what I understand. It's what-
Right now, well,
I understand that yourself and Mr. Moore met with the fire department.
Before we go in that conversation, Joe, can we decide what we want to do with this court situation? Do we want to move it forward? And at our next committee meeting, introduce a resolution and move forward with this?
That would mean making an offer of employment to the individual that's been identified as a viable candidate, advising the municipal division that it's your intention to go live on July 1st, and then go ahead and considering that resolution to adopt the shared service agreement at the regular meeting. And so that would be to go ahead and make the offer of employment. So any resolution, any motion would be to make the offer of employment and to list the shared service agreement for consideration and hopeful adoption at the regular meeting.
We passed the shared service agreement last year?
Yes.
Last year. So we're just moving through the process to make sure we meet the county court's requirements. And this is the next one in their step of requirements. So we can get to the process of Woodland's agreement with Bass River ends July the 1st, so that's the July 1st deadline that we're trying to get to. We need to move, once we start, if you're in agreement of this tonight, then we're going to start moving on the other items, the computers and that kind of stuff that the state needs to get set up for us. So I think if you're ready to move forward on the budget, and you're ready to move forward on this, then we can fairly confidently say that we're moving forward on the agreement.
So this line item in the budget, do we support this and are we willing to move forward with Woodland as a committee?
So the long and the short of it, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is out of the approximately $24,000 that's going to be realized in revenue, $14,000 approximately is going to Woodland, and the other $10,000 is going to help to offset the new employee we're hiring.
basically, yes.
Yep.
And this employee is something that's going to be mandated down the line.
That's the,
Based on discussions Doug's
I
telling
mean,
me.
I understand for the joint court, it's absolutely mandated, but
They would very strongly suggest that we have a deputy for more hours. Right now, our deputies show up, we're back to just one. They show up for the court session only. They come for the court session, they're done.
Did we ever have a deputy serving the court?
Not more than the day of court.
So that's consistent with Margaret in place full-time, or her hours covering the court?
Margaret is technically only part-time.
In the court, right, yeah. But she covers those hours that the court office is open, and what are those hours again?
8 to, I think it's 3. They're different than our hours. 8 to-
Every day?
I'm not sure they're technically open on Friday. She is, but I'm not sure the court hours are.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look.
And so that's historically been the case, right? That hasn't changed?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the chance that they would actually force any change upon you is pretty slim. But when you get involved in making changes, that's when they have an opening to make demands, and that's what they're doing here. I don't think that, in all candidness, that they're going to demand that you hire any more staff than you've historically utilized, unless there was a dramatic difference in volume.
We don't presently meet the staff requirements of the volume we have, but because we have historically made it work, they've allowed us to continue.
And also because most of the other municipal courts in Burlington County don't have the recommended staffing level either.
Correct.
Correct.
But the same thing is, I don't think they like when, if she calls out sick, we just put a closed sign up.
Oh, yeah, that's, they want to provide a high level of service, and that's important. So what they're saying is, hey, to the extent that you have the ability to address this, we'd like to have it addressed. They're rather more aggressive in their suggestions in that regard, but I don't think that they would unilaterally force anything upon us anytime soon.
Right now, it's just them making comment and recommendation.
And the door's open when you're talking about changes, so that's when they really like to try to assert themselves. I mean, I'm sure you could limp along exactly the same way you are right now without them getting involved. So, but as my discussions with Doug have revealed, he wants to get out ahead of potentially any demands made with this facility, which the timing as to whether or not they would make the change anything here is speculative. But also to recognize that, Woodland has a much better facility. You're providing a better quality of service to everybody involved by conducting it there. And I think that's what the municipal division recognizes and why they support the consolidation.
What do you need? Do you need a motion?
Yeah, probably best to have a motion and a second, and whether we're going to move forward with the court in Woodland, and we'll do a vote.
Yeah, I'll make the motion. I stay the course.
Hiring of the employee.
Yeah.
Hiring the employee.
Hiring of the employee.
I'll second.
Roll call, Sean?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes,
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Gordon?
Yes.
Who made the motion?
I did, and then Joe seconded it.
Okay.
So Doug, you'll contact that individual
I will work with Margaret to make the offer.
and make the offer and get that done so we can contact the division and have everything in place.
Yeah.
Okay. We won't change it off the budget, but it was a line item that
That's
we
fine.
discussed, and we need to move forward with it. Doug, you want to continue?
I guess, are there any questions
Any questions from the committee
Committee.
on the budget?
on the budget?
Joe had a question about the fire company's budget, and Joe Seeley and I met with the fire department twice, and we asked them to show us their expenses in 2018 and to expand the titles of where their fees were, which they did. They gave us a nice spreadsheet and outlined their budget in much more detail. And then we met with Mr. Kramer and Mr. Haynes, and came to a consensus, at least the four of us, that the money that was in the budget was adequate for what they need to move forward. And that does not include the new chief's car, which we budgeted for last year, which We built an agreement what type of vehicle we would offer for that, and I think the number was somewhere around $55,000.
55,000.
Yeah, we currently have an appropriation within a capital ordinance for a chief's vehicle, so. As far as the support for the $90,000, the budget that they gave us has their utilities going up 25%.
So much.
Their attorney fees going up 300%. And they're going from a $1,000 budgeted actual expenses for an attorney to $4,000.
So are they expecting a lot of lawsuits?
Can't answer that.
They told us with all the Oprah stuff. That was their answer to the mayor and I when we asked them, because we brought that question up.
You know, $6,000 in just miscellaneous items with no explanation, so. In my opinion, $75,000 as that appropriation is fine, because we do have still built in the budget expenses for repairs to their trucks and everything else, which we're basing off of past history. What did it cost in 18? Budgeting accordingly. So you guys can do what you want. You're the elected officials.
I'm fine with the recommendation.
So right now, as far as the allocation directly to them, it's $75,000.
And this is based upon what Arch?
Well, originally it was based on what Arch had told us. And when after Sammy and the mayor met with them, and they gave us the budget amount, I'm just looking at it based on what their expenses are. Utilities, they had expenses of $32,200, but we're budgeting $40,000.
And they have everything to back up those expenses for 2018?
I'm assuming they do.
Don't assume.
But I don't know what the justification would be to go up basically $8,000. Right? And again, if they do run short, we have those other expenses that, can be a discussion if they have things that need to be paid.
Answers my question.
That's the fire company. Okay.
Doug, any other big items you want to talk about in the budget? Let's go over the capital piece. I mean, the O&M is pretty much,
As far as in the capital,
we go through every year, right? O&M.
well, in the original memo that I gave you 2 months ago, said really what the other expenses, what changed and why things were going up. As far as within the budget for capital items, we have, because we're looking to get out of doing it through capital ordinances, I talked about the $65,000 for the down payment if we wanted to do a $1.3 million ordinance. Building renovations for $17,500, which is the same amount that we've done in the past couple years, just for building improvements at the various buildings. And we do have a line item, we've increased the public works equipment line.
What page are you on, Rodney?
I'm in the summary one, which is this one.
Because we have two different ones.
Yes. It's easier to look in this one.
This one here?
Probably. Public works equipment, we budgeted in 18 $55,000.
Grab that one.
Doug has requested 92,000.
What page you get, Rodney? Which one?
So page 11 of 14 of this one. The easiest place to look. You guys all want to go back to that one. Gave you a nice summarized version of one, but you want to use this other one. Go to page.
The guy does a pin.
If you're in that one, it's 11 of 14. If you're in that other one, it's page 30.
Two different versions.
It's not two different versions, it's the same numbers in both things. Capital section in that one that's titled Budget/Revenue Preparation Worksheet, it's on page 39 of that document. So the only real difference, well, yes, the capital improvement fund went up because there's not as much sitting, we don't have as much banked away anymore, so it's to basically fund whatever you may currently want to do for a current year. Not that we've put any ordinance in place for 19 yet, but that would be what the down payment would be on a $1.3 million. So the only real difference is public works equipment, and I believe 92,000 was a dump truck.
That is a F-550 with a dumping stake body on it with a lift gate to replace truck 4.
And again, we're looking to put it in the budget because the equipment, drivable equipment, trucks, they only have a 5-year life, so they pull down the length of time that you can actually go out and borrow funds for it. So, you can have a whole list of 10-year life items, and you throw the 5-year in there, so now we're down and we can only borrow money for 8.9 years, something like that. And as far as trucks go, it doesn't matter, we don't get anything more than a 5-year life. Some of the bigger equipment, a grader, things like that, they get a longer life too, but as far as bonding goes, 5 years maximum.
Just for bonding, not real life.
Not real life.
Not real life.
Let's be clear about that.
I'm looking at how how long did I borrow the money
No,
for?
I understand that.
I'm looking on how long they last.
Well, that's,
Because believe me, in my other town, even a trash truck that costs $300,000, you get a 5-year life. So that's the capital that's built within the budget. As far as the capital budget itself, it's going to be very similar. The capital budget is not money that we're raising in the current year. This here is what we're raising. The capital budget is what you're doing in the future, and you're borrowing for. So when you put a capital budget together that has $1.3 million in it, it's not 1 year's expenditures. Yes, it would be 1 year's expenditures, but it's not 1 year funding. You're going to fund that over time through your debt.
well, I guess the thing I'm concerned about is the incurring of more debt. I can remember 2 weeks ago giving us a pretty good education on where we were from a debt perspective.
Well, that's the original, when I put this budget together, the tax increase that I recommended was just the amount that your debt was going up for the current year over the prior year. And what you were going to have, that debt was going to stay stable for a 10-year period of time.
My point is I'm concerned about incurring more debt. I recognize the need to have capital projects, but I also am concerned about where we are from a debt service perspective. I went to the first hour and 15 minutes of the school board meeting tonight, and that was a very difficult meeting to sit through, mainly because of where they are from a state aid perspective. We have, one of the things we learned tonight at the school board meeting was the fact that they may be consolidating into one building, which would get us down to one building in Tabernacle with 2 vacant ones. I know the elephant in the room is, we talked about Sequoia. Some of us like Sequoia, some don't. Some think it's a good option, some don't. But I think we at least ought to have something built into the budget to cover operational costs perhaps for Sequoia if that's an avenue we decide to travel. I'm not suggesting we spend $1.3 million to buy it. What I'm saying is that perhaps we ought to look at an opportunity to be able to take the costs over from the district and then utilize the space. But I think it's a conversation we ought to have, and I think we ought to be careful about how much money we borrow moving forward. I was recalling when you and I sat downstairs, we went through the equipment list. We liquidated several vehicles, but I'd like to kind of get an idea whether or not that incurring more equipment is a good move. I like equipment, don't get me wrong, but I'm concerned about the debt service.
Well, this truck here would not, doesn't have debt associated with it. It's going to be paid on the current year, basically.
I understand, I'm just more general concern about debt service.
Any other questions from the committee about the budget? Any comments?
Is there anything else you need from me?
So for my purposes, you're okay with a 2-cent tax increase, which is basically what my last recommendation was? And would you want me to cut money out of line items or use surplus, which is what my recommendation would be?
Well, are there any line items anyone wants to cut?
And again, if you just, prior to that, this is just a budgeted plan. Doesn't say we have to spend the money.
Right.
And if we don't spend it, it flows back into surplus.
Ronnie, if we were to take cuts from anywhere to look at operational costs potentially for Sequoia, where will we take that from?
Well, as I said, we could trim a little bit out of the court, only because we're now looking at it not really starting until July. But do we have from the school district what the operational costs of that building actually are?
They told us 25 grand. That's what they have budgeted now.
And that's covering all utilities and
No,
everything?
that's covering nobody in the building. That's covering the electric that's in there now. But
Yeah.
whether or not, I guess my point is that we ought to.
Well, that would be the electric and heat to keep the building
Right.
stable would be one thing. You would have to be looking at some type of capital plan for renovations because yes, they renovated it for schoolrooms, but not for municipal building.
I know, but I've been through it at least 3 times, and certainly there's opportunities there. Doug's been in it with me right after the accident, so I think there's opportunity there. My point is it's an asset that belongs to taxpayers. It's sitting vacant. I think it's our responsibility to be engaged actively with the district to find a use for the building. And maybe I'm the only person at the table that feels that way, but I will tell you that I think it's irresponsible for us not to at least have some discussion about it. I think it's irresponsible for us not to have at least some allocation or line item in the budget if we potentially are in control of the asset. I'm not saying spend $1.2 million to buy it from the district. That seems to be something that keeps being brought up, and I'm not advocating that. What I'm advocating is that we find a responsible way to be able to utilize a township asset. And I say township, I say taxpayer asset.
What do we got contingent?
Let's do
We can
my
take
last
it.
conversation.
We can do it.
My last conversation with the superintendent, his intention was to market the building and try to sell the building.
His intention to sell the building was because we flat out told him we didn't want it for $1.2 million. We both know what happened. Let's be honest.
He's looking to market the building.
And we never voted, the other thing is we never voted on that proposal to begin with. There's no record of any vote on the committee's position on Sequoia. There's no record of anything.
No, what we did is we replied to a letter that he gave us, and the consensus at that meeting was that we were not in favor of the proposal. And in my last conversation with the superintendent, I asked him what his intentions with the building, and he said they wanted to market and sell it.
And that was because we told him we didn't want anything to do with it. That's why. He doesn't have a whole lot of options if the township tells him we don't want it.
What Stephen is saying, I believe that we all agreed that we do not want to take over the water treatment plant because we don't want to get into builder's remediation.
That, and we also said we didn't want to pay for a building that was already paid for with tax dollars.
That was stated. I believe by yourself and Mrs. Brown. Either one of you or both of you made that statement, but I don't recall us actually voting, because I was in favor of looking into school.
Now, what we did is we built a consensus on how to reply to a communication that was presented to us from the school board committee. And the consensus was that we denied their proposal. And the proposal was twofold. It was to purchase the building and to purchase the sewer treatment plant for $1.4 million.
Would we be interested in entertaining the idea of opening up discussion with the Board of Education again about that bill? Entertain the idea, because Mr. Lee is bringing up a very good point. I mean, if we could consolidate our services and possibly move it over there, what kind of a savings would that give us with our other buildings? I mean, because we're still talking about getting rid of the old squad building, because it's basically an albatross. It's costing us money. We could move whatever we're using it for now. We could move that into the emergency services building. I mean, because there's more than enough room there, especially with that meeting room.
I agree. You know, everything we're using the old squad building for can be accommodated here, firehouse, or TRS.
Right.
But, you know, I think we have to look at, do we really need the space that's at Sequoia? And how would we utilize that space? What would it cost us to get into that space? And then what would we do with all the other space that we have, for instance, in this building? We would have the added cost of funding this building. Just like the school has the cost of funding an empty building. And can we afford that?
Would we have the cost of this building? I thought we were renting this from. No, we did buy it.
We bought it.
We did buy it.
We bought it for $10.
It's $1 million.
Junior mechanics.
Junior
Yes.
mechanics. But what I said was, I wanted the building, but not for the tune of.
No, right.
Right. I never said I didn't want the building.
Right.
I just said for
You
that
didn't,
amount
you
of
didn't want to
money.
buy it for 1.2.
Correct. It was
Correct.
taxpayers.
And to be clear, that wasn't an offer. It wasn't an offer that was submitted to the Township Committee. That we talked about offers. That was an appraisal that was done by the school district. That's what the building is valued as. And that's all it was a reference point. It wasn't an offer, it wasn't a proposal, it was a appraisal for $1.2 million. And that's all it was. And they had indicated that it was worth $1.2 million, and as if it was going to get sold to someone, that's what they would ask for it. But the dialogue was ongoing in December about trying to work collectively together to find uses for the building.
My question is, if we are moving this court to go to Woodland because of renovations here, what's it going to take for that building renovations and everything that may have to go into it that we don't know? I'm just asking that question because we're talking about moving Peter to pay Paul because of what it could take us of this building, modifications and all of that, and what it could potentially cost the township to go to Woodland. If we buy that building, what's the potential cost going to be for the building, you know, in the all-out scheme?
Yeah, unfortunately, the problem is that we don't own the building.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have dialogue with the school district to even talk about the building. So it's hard for us to be able to have a hard number in terms of what it would cost, what it would be, what we would use it for. We haven't had any of those discussions, and part of the problem is we don't own the building, and we're not talking to people that do.
Stephen, I talked to the superintendent. There is a dialogue. I asked him what he wanted to do with the building. He said he wants to market and sell it. You know, I'll go meet with the board and him again tomorrow. They're welcome to come here and tell us what they want to do with their building. Do they want to give us the building and have us take over the operation of the building? They should come tell us that, if that's what they want us to do. If they want to sell the building, they should sell the building.
Well, like I said, my question is should we and are we willing to, like you're saying, open up the dialogue with the Board of Education again about that building? Not to buy it, but to either pick up the cost so that the township can utilize it, if it's in our best interest. And that's what we have to do. We have to sit down and dissect everything we have.
Yeah. And what I heard tonight is the schools maybe even considered consolidating into one building and having a whole empty school building.
So they may be interested in entertaining the idea.
Yeah.
I mean, because Mrs. Brown said she'd like to have the building, I'd like to have the building, Mr. Lee would love to have the building.
Like I said, what are we going to use the building for? We need to talk about what would we use the building for, what would it cost to get into the building, to renovate the building, and then what will we do with the other buildings that we have? I mean, basically, I see it is if we move from this building to that building, then we have an empty building that we're paying an operation cost that we have to do something with. And does this building suit our needs? The whole purpose of moving the court out of here was to free up space in here. We just spent a sizable amount of money renovating the building, changing the offices around and painting and carpeting.
Windows.
What was that, Doug?
Windows.
Windows. You know.
If Kim's husband can't be here be up here to see her sworn in, then guess what? We might need a new building, or we might need to move somewhere else. This is not an adequate place for meetings. I'm sorry, but it's not. And if we're looking for uses, I can give you three. One is we can eliminate the annex and actually put all the township offices and the township services under one roof, number one. But I think it's not a decision we make tonight. I think collectively, as a community, we need to have this dialogue with the school board and talk about assets. I mean, how long are we going to talk about it? We're just going to go in circles. It's just, we need to work collectively together.
Like I said, I spoke with the superintendent, I got his feedback, the school board is welcome to come here and tell us if they want us to take over the building. If you want me to.
Well, you've got three committee members right now that want to have dialogue with the school district.
Okay. I'll be happy to have a dialogue with the school. I'll contact the superintendent tomorrow and ask him, what's his intention in the building?
No, I don't think you're asking him what the intention of the building is. I think the three committee
It's
members.
his building. He has to decide what he wants to do with the building. I can't tell him what to do with his own building.
I'm not saying that, Joe, but we've got three committee members that want to have dialogue to find out what can we do with the building. What collective needs do we have as a community? And what collectively can we do with the building? We don't want to buy it for $1.2 million. That doesn't make a lot of sense. They own the building. I don't think we have to buy it. But my point is that we ought to be engaged collectively as a community to make some decisions, long term.
Like I said, I'll be happy to ask them, what's their intention of the building? What do you want to do with the building?
You've already asked them that.
Right.
And they want, because we've shown no interest in it, they want to sell it for $1.2 million. They want to put it out for public bid.
Well, Joe, I can ask the question different. I can say, if we had interest in the building, would you give us the building?
But that's not the way the conversation ought to work. It's got to be a collective decision, and that's how communities work. It's not just I say you do. We collectively have a really good opportunity to be able to take an asset that belongs to Tabernacle taxpayers and maximize its use. And we do that collectively with the school board. I sat there tonight and watched three staff members of our community have to stand there and plead for their jobs. They have a $600,000 cut next year. They have a $300,000 cut this year. It's an empty building sitting over there. We've got an annex over here, which is virtually useless. I God bless Tom and Lisa for working over there every day. And we have an empty building sitting down on Hawkins Road. And we can't even agree to have dialogue with the school board about assets. It's just irresponsible.
I'm trying to think of how to present it to the Board of Education. Not present it as, what's your intent with the building, what do you want to do with the building? Of course, they're going to come back to you and state, we'd like to sell the building.
Mm-hmm.
But if we give them a presentation or present them with, township may have a need for that building, would you be willing to work with us and negotiate. Okay, not even say we're gonna pay, $1.2 million for the building, because I'm not gonna pay 1.2 either. But there has to be a way to work something out with them. But, like I said, in the meantime, we have to figure out what are our true needs. I mean, I got this paper, or should say the information that you and Rick worked on years and years past. Looking at that, like as Mr. Lee stated, I'm looking at the building that's just sitting there, and I already made the statement, to me it's an albatross. We either need to sell it, tear it down, do something. Just, put it out for bid, see what we can get for it.
Well, we have an appraisal for it, and we know that what the repairs are going to be moving forward, right, Doug?
Yes.
We know it needs a roof,
It needs insulation, it needs a roof.
and we know that.
Depending on what your end use is determines what the rest of the expenses would be. If you're gonna use it for storage, it's pretty much good to go right now. We put a little insulation in, cut the heater back, we don't need the air conditioning, and we're good. If you're going to use it as a public entity or a public facility that, for kids and that kind of stuff, you're going to eventually have to put some money back into the floor, the walls, and the air conditioning. So, that air conditioning is pretty much at the near end of its life expectancy. So,
Well, like I stated, I mean, the groups that facilitize that building, they could be moved over to the.
Very easily.
I mean, we have the means to accommodate that.
I mean, Doug has some other properties that didn't sell last year, and he's going to move forward with them again this year. We could add that to the list if that's what the committee wants to do. As far as open a dialogue with the school, I'll be happy to meet with the school.
I'm just saying that there has to be some form of communication with them, just to let them know we still have an interest in it, but we're not paying 1.2 million. But what are the other options? I mean, and throw things out at them, see what they'd be willing to entertain. Because if they're getting cut as drastically as Mr. Lee is stating, which I strongly believe they are, they may be open for anything right now.
Okay.
Part of the reason this is here is, if you remember the last couple of meetings, I talked about evaluate the space.
Yeah.
See what our needs are,
Yeah.
see what we can do. That's, I believe is why this is here.
Right.
Yeah.
And you need to know what you need.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I was going through a box and actually saw the original copy of this, and it's almost, a lot of the questions that are here are what are we talking about? So we've collectively talked
You need to
about.
know what your needs are, and you plan on your needs.
Okay, so I'll be happy to talk to the school board and see what options are available for the future of that building. And then, with this and that, we'll start evaluating our facilities and
We're basically
decide how we're going
doing,
to move forward with these facilities.
we're basically doing the same thing they're doing right now.
The liaison committee we had, I'm sorry, Joe, go ahead.
I said they're evaluating their needs, and that's basically what we're doing.
The liaison committee that we had, that I started when I was mayor, I met with John Sherry, and you sat on it with me. That was a good opportunity to sit with two members of the school board, sometimes three, and the superintendent, and have some good dialogue. We had everything from a meeting in the gazebo one night to sitting here. It was good dialogue, and we abandoned that subcommittee. I think we ought to have, at the very least, moving forward, we ought to have a subcommittee with a liaison committee with the school board all the time, ongoing. I got to commend you, Joe, specifically for reaching out to Glenn in terms of helping him with the funding piece. To take the leadership role in that, I commend you for that, because that's the kind of relationship that we need to have. That's the kind of work we've got to do collectively as a community, and I commend you for that. I think to go a step further, I think we ought to rekindle the liaison committee.
I think we got it, didn't we? It's the mayor and Kim.
Do you want to serve on that again with me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, if the committee's in favor, Steve and I will be a liaison to the school board, and we'll re-engage. Any problem, Kim? Tammy?
I'm gonna say, actually, Ken couldn't sit on it.
And we'll have a dialogue with them together.
Sounds good. Thank you.
As far as the budget goes, is it your request to go with their estimate, should I move $12,000 into utilities?
Let me ask you this.
If you said it's $25,000 for the year is what they say it costs for the utilities.
Let's say that we got to a point, and if government worked fast, which doesn't happen, but if we got to a point by, say, September, October, where we could work on this, as Kim has pointed out, if we get to a point where we are over there, are there transfers enough to be able to survive?
I can't transfer until November.
November, no, I know that, that's why I said October.
So you couldn't take it over. We technically couldn't start paying utilities on the building because we may or may not have enough money in currently budgeted for that.
Right. A lot's got to happen before we get to that point. But
Why I said,
Yeah.
I could beef up the utilities now for the court OE. As I said, we had budgeted for a full year's worth of rent payment to Woodland. So obviously, if it's not going to be effective until July, there's $7,000, right? $7,200. We don't currently have a public safety director. I could take the salary and wage line. I could take $5,000 out of that, no problem. Still leaving a line item there if you want to hire someone later in the year. And move it into utilities now. Again, it's just a plan and it's puts it there. But that's.
I would say wait till November. And if we get to November, we're talking 2 months. The school's already budgeted for the services in that building.
The school hasn't budgeted for it right now.
Okay.
It's, their budget's not in place. So.
No, but by increasing the utility line item, what you're referring to.
Yeah. But I'm not increasing the budget. I'm saying at this point I can move money now and not worry about waiting till November. If maybe you cut this deal in and it goes through by August.
Yeah, at least you've got the money there to be able to do what you need to do. I'm okay with the line item. As long as it doesn't have an increase in the overall budget, I'm okay with it.
It's not changing the total numbers at all. It's just moving it from one line to another.
I'm okay with that.
And if we don't spend it, it goes back into surplus.
Right.
Any other budget questions from the committee or changes that you want to make line items?
Were you saying 12,000 or 10? Did you say 12?
I said 12.
I think 12 is a fair number.
And that's just in case, and again, it's just a plan. And yes, budget transfers can happen in November. If the money is needed somewhere else, we can move it then. But God forbid you do something that happens in August, and then we don't have an appropriation that can cover it. Okay. So then back to the overall question was, you're good with a 2-cent tax increase overall, with me using additional surplus?
David, you good with 2 cents?
As long as Rodney's okay, is what it comes down to. He talked about debt service. We've had some sidebar conversations periodically about the budget. If you're comfortable with a 2-cent, then that's...
For this year, it's 2 cents. Ultimately, you need to get up, to a point that, debt service, you lock into that, and that's a long-term thing. Because of the results of 18, the sale of property that we did do, we have some, we have some fund balance that can use to cover it. But, the amount of surplus that's going to balance this budget, we can't expect next year to necessarily have as much surplus available. It's going to revert back to what we've used in the past.
Is the district going over the 2.5%? What did they tell you?
Sam, you okay with the 2%?
Yeah, okay.
Kim?
Okay. So I will have documents ready for the meeting on the 29th for introduction.
Since we talked about the squad building, this is probably I can't remember how many times we talked about it. Sounds like we're getting closer to agreement that there's not much value in that building to this township moving forward into the future. Could we build a consensus and have Doug add it to his surplus list and put it, we already have an appraisal for it, and advertise it and sell it, so we don't have to put a roof on it, we don't have to do the other improvements to it?
Yeah.
I'm in agreement for that.
What's it zoned? What's it zoned?
I'm going to have to go back and look at that. I think it's within the 500 foot of commercial along 206. But I'd have to go out and look at the.
It's an issue.
I like the face.
I may know in a few minutes.
Rezone it.
And what are you willing to accept as a business going in there?
Make us an offer.
So,
Closer to the residential neighbors.
next door, across the street.
50 feet.
But you're surrounded on the back side and one side by commercial, by the plaza.
Rusty's not in there anymore.
So, but to the east, you have a residence right up against you, and directly across the street, you have a residence.
So do you want to authorize the sale now for him to include it in the advertisement? Or do you want to get an idea of what you might end up getting as a result of that sale before you authorize that?
Well, we have an appraisal, right, Doug?
We have an appraisal.
I meant in the form of a use.
A use? Well,
Dan, still on
unless we know what it's zoned.
I'm working on it.
Okay.
It's very small.
Do you need a pair of glasses? Binoculars?
I was gonna get
You want glasses?
Huh? You online? Yeah, I'm online.
Do we have a zoning map downstairs?
Yes, we do.
I have it right here.
Tom can put up with the iPad, it'd be easier to see.
And if it's split, what is it? Lesser of that.
Well, they would have to go for a change of use, right? If they,
Either way, they
Either way, they have to come for a change of use. and you
in
can't-
front of the land development
No,
board, right?
that's correct. Yes.
But see, that makes the whole public auction and sale process a little cumbersome because it might be better to understand what the uses are. It can be advertised that way. You're not looking for offers that are contingent upon a use variance being
That's what
granted.
Dan's gonna look up. That's also.
Well, then like, we would have to advertise it needs a change of use, right?
That'd be nice. Yeah.
But couldn't they get the change of use contingent on sale? Like most developers do?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, prior to buy, they could come in and
So
get the
you
change.
would theoretically accept an offer that was contingent upon the proposed change of use then being authorized by the land development board. And so you should indicate that in the advertisement too, to promote people's interest in the building if you want to do that. And so having a good idea of what the existing zoning is and what it might be otherwise, is something you might want to discuss before you actually have Doug go out and include it in the auction.
Just in the, so it's regional growth commercial.
Regional growth commercial.
Yeah, 'cause it's the second property in, right, from 206.
And the permitted uses in that zone are retail,
Yeah, but it's pretty broad.
yeah.
Yeah.
So any number of different commercial uses then, which would, help the value.
The restriction would be on the size of the lot and the parking and septic.
So then,
That's gonna be the limiting factor, is the septic,
Septic.
limit what can be done there based on the nitrate dilution depending on use. But any sort of commercial retail office would probably be a nice fit, not so much any sort of restaurant or, food place.
But I think irregardless of what we learn and what we decide and what we come up with going back to this piece, I don't think that building's in our future.
No.
I just don't.
Okay,
Thanks, Dan.
you got your direction, Mr. Kramer?
Okay. We'll include that.
Okay, so we're done with the budget discussion. Then we had a spirit conversation about future property needs. We're used to continuing that until after Steve and I meet with the school and see where that's going to go. And then we can start evaluating the rest of our facilities.
That was very nice way you put that. That was very nice way you put that.
Okay. Let's go do our roundtable. And Peter, you want to start?
I know that we want to talk about the gross vehicle weight issues at some point in time tonight.
That's what Tom's here.
Yeah. And then, LaShawn, did we hear from Renwick and Associates or any of those other bidders with respect to further detailing what
Yes,
there's information in the packet?
yes,
So we can discuss that in the executive session then?
yes.
Okay, terrific. Well, that's what I have, is to discuss the appointment of the appraiser for the Eric's Causeway Road acquisition. So I'll save that time for executive session and comment when Tom talks about the gross vehicle weight. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Just in case you haven't heard, I'm sure you have, we did receive a grant for Oak Shade Road, DOT grant, $246,709. So it's just something to put on a future agenda to discuss that.
Mr. Boyd.
I guess there was some discussion at the last township committee meeting regarding the proposed change to the gross vehicle weight of parking vehicles in a residential neighborhood. Namely, it would be section 7-12. Currently, the ordinance states no person shall park any truck, bus, trailer, or tractor the gross registered weight of which exceeds 12,000 pounds out of doors within any residential district of a regional growth area, Pinelands Village, and approved major subdivisions wherever located in the township. This requirement shall not pertain to farms wherever located. For the benefit of those individuals that weren't here when I spoke in January, there was an incident where someone was complaining about trucks parked in a residential area and where they lived. And the individual stated to me that it didn't matter if it was 1 pound over that 12,000, it was still a violation, and I was to issue a notice to that individual. Part of the difficulty that I have from a code enforcement perspective is I don't necessarily have police powers to go and knock on a person's door and ask for a license, registration, and insurance cards. I don't have that. The township administrator and myself had discussed what would be a way to facilitate that to make it easy to enforce. At no time did we ever bring up commercial, and I listened to the meeting minutes just to try to answer some of the questions that were presented to this committee. At no time did I specifically mention commercial specifically. In fact, I gave an example that when Mr. Kramer's regular vehicle went in for service, he had a loaner vehicle, and that loaner vehicle that was given to him would be illegal to park at his house because it was a 350 chassis, which was in excess of 12,000 pounds. When we did some research, we found out that in fact, the one gentleman that spoke at the last committee meeting stated that Ford was the big one, so I'll just utilize Ford, that a Ford F-250 is approaching it, and in some aspects even exceeding that 12,000. So if an individual were to have a Ford F-250, it very well may exceed that 12,000 pound, but we would not allow them to park at their own residence. A 350, for as far as I know, all the major manufacturers, that's correct, right?
May I?
You may. Okay, that information I believe was given to you. I have Ford's website up right now, if anybody wants to care to look at it. And on the front page is a Ford 2019 Super Duty F-250 XL, base package. When I go down to specifications, and I'll certainly pass this around, the maximum gross vehicle weight registered is 14,000 pounds. That's Ford's website. Part of the information, as I just saw, it was without a box. That's a cab, I believe, only. When I went to look up what a Sprinter van would be, numerous electricians, plumbers, etc., mechanical contractors utilize these vehicles and they take them home. They either operate out of their home or they take them home. They're coming in at a gross registered weight of 13.2, in excess of the 12,000. The intent was never to say that we want to bring dump trucks, I think was mentioned, or anything like that. I believe people also mentioned that backup alarms would be on it, going off at all times of the night. I actually researched that, and there is no state, quote, state law that requires backup alarms on commercial vehicles. There was a proposed in the House in 2003 that was defeated, and it was proposed in the Senate in 1998 and was defeated because it goes against federal guidelines. OSHA does require it for commercial vehicles on construction sites where there's nobody to back you up for a backup alarm. I know that one resident stated that he didn't want to hear diesel engines starting up in the middle of the night with a backup alarm, possibly. And he said it could even happen in neighborhoods such as Harrogate. And I had to really laugh because every winter storm we have in the middle of the night, there's a diesel engine that starts up in the middle of the night in Harrogate to come here to clear the roads. So the diesel engine technology is such that the noise is much less. I also heard that the budget had in for a chief's vehicle, I believe, for this year. One of the proposed vehicles that the fire department has put forth would not be permitted to be parked at a residential house because it would exceed that gross vehicle weight.
Which is currently 12,000, right?
It's currently 12,000 pounds, that's correct, Councilor.
And your proposal was?
17 or 17.5, I forget the exact number. The reason that when the administrator and I talked with that is that if you were to go onto the New Jersey Division of Motor Vehicles website and find out where they consider a commercial vehicle to be, they consider a pickup truck to be not a commercial, non-commercial truck. A non-commercial truck is a vehicle designed primarily for transportation of property but not used for commercial transportation of goods, wares, merchandise, and/or use for hire. The most common non-commercial truck today is an SUV. Vehicles that qualify are pickup trucks. Once again, when I went on to Ford's website and I put in Ford pickup truck, it came up with a Ford F-450, which that person stated had a gross vehicle weight correctly of 16.5, which is why the administrator and I came up with a recommendation to be either 17 or 17.5. Both numbers have been passed around. The 550 series was in excess of that. That's where that number came from. So it's extremely difficult to enforce an ordinance when, if I have a 2019 Ford F-250 that's coming in at that limit, when I did the research on a 1996 Ford F-350 and the gross vehicle weight of that particular vehicle was 8,800. Part of my explanation at that January meeting is due to the advances in technology. The gross vehicle weight of vehicles has increased. Additionally, and Counselor, please correct me if I'm wrong, the ordinance states gross registered weight, GRW. That would be combined with, that would be combined.
Payload combined, yeah.
Payload combined, which means I could basically take a half-ton pickup truck and put a trailer on it, and we're over the weight limit. One of the residents also stated that Southampton had an 8,000-pound limit, and did we look at the meeting, the last meeting. And once again, during my research, a Ford F-150, sticking with his statement of a Ford, is now 7,900 GVWR, which probably in a year or two is going to exceed that 8,000-pound mark. So that was my whole intention of doing it. It was not to say, I want commercial vehicles, quote, 550 dump trucks in residential neighborhoods. That's not it. But it's to allow me to enforce the code such that I can determine what is in the best interest of this township. That's the primary purpose.
So to prohibit the dump trucks, could we so write the ordinance to just specify SUVs and pickups and exclude dump trucks, things that could happen at that weight class?
Carve it out any way you'd like. As Tom was mentioning, I think the issue to appreciate is it's more complicated because of these smaller vehicles now having these larger weights. You look at the overall intent and purpose of your zoning regulation, and what it is obviously is to prevent people in their neighborhood being negatively affected by the guy next door because of his vehicle, whether it be a commercial vehicle or otherwise. On the other side of the coin is you want to accommodate what's reasonable among people bringing their work cars home and all of a sudden and all of that. 8,000 used to be a pretty good cutoff because of the way the vehicles were able to utilize that weight, and given the current configuration of those vehicles now, you know, as Tom just forecast, the F-150 might be a half-ton pickup in essence in a couple of years, so it makes it a little more difficult for him. And Tom gets caught in between because on the one hand, he wants to afford people to have the ability to use their home and bring their vehicle home if it's not an offensive issue, and on the other hand, people who have a problem with their neighbor or whatever, they come to him and he needs to have a clear-cut answer. And so raising it, I think, assists him in that. It allows him to tell that person that, hey, if it's an F-250 and that kind of thing, they're clearly under, and if it's anything beyond that, they're clearly over. So he's asking them to raise that minimum threshold with something that's readily identifiable as to the vehicle type.
I think you have to be careful in how you limit it if you do it anything other than GVWR. Because what are you going to, if you say just pick up an SUV, you have all these vans, that's one item. The second is, if I have a utility body on my F-250 instead of the regular pickup bed, am I now not allowed? If I have a flatbed, I'm just thinking myself, I had a flatbed for years at the farm that at one point in time I used as transportation back and forth. It was an F-350, it was registered at 12,000 pounds at the time. But
Sounds like the ordinance needs some work done, and maybe what we can do is have tiers at certain weight classes. You can have certain things in a higher weight class, maybe less. You know, the thing that I think most people would find intrusive is a dump truck, right? Yeah, you could take something that's up to 17,000 pounds with a flatbed and have a commercial truck that you're, you know, hauling steel, iron, a whole host of stuff on it.
you're at 17,000 pounds, you're not going to, you may haul hay.
Okay.
You're not going to haul any amount of steel, anything. You're going to be over, you're not going to axle it. And so there's that consideration. But if you wanted to go down to 16.5, 16.9, so we make sure that we don't get that bigger dump truck that you get if a guy has an F-250 or an F-350, that he has the ability to have a dump on it. Is that the contingent?
I mean, currently you could have a 350 or commonly known as a 1-ton vehicle that have been used for tow trucks for years. And they're coming in under that 12 because the capacities back in the day weren't there. Whereas you could probably get a 250 that would be over it today. It's a lot of it's driven by the technology aspect of it. Conversely, on the trailer side of it, we're going the opposite way. The heavy trailers of the yesteryear are becoming the lightweight trailers. So the trailers are permitted to get bigger because they're made out of lighter materials. So I understand the dilemma. I certainly and appreciate the dilemma. And I hope you can understand my dilemma as well, that from an enforcement procedure, I don't ever want to bring a case or write up an individual for something that when I come to court, I don't believe I'm going to win. That's a lot of how I judge it. And I think there has to be good sense utilized in the enforcement of it. No different than an officer, I don't believe, writes you up for doing 51 and a 50. But this particular individual was adamant about it. And
The idea is we need to have an ordinance that makes sense, but is also enforceable, and that's the thing I think we're challenged with, is that
it's very much so.
You're challenged right now with having, trying to meet 12. If we go to 17 or 17 and a half, or whatever the number is, what kind of a can of worms does that open up for you in terms of trying to do your job?
Well, at this point, it's easy because I could just cut it off that anything above the 450 is over it, and anything that or under it. If it
450 and above would be excluded by your proposed number, right?
No, sir, 550 and above.
550.
Because technically, according to the New Jersey DMV, pickups are excluded from commercial, and Ford makes a 450 pickup. That was our reasoning to try to.
Because somebody might have an F-450 that
is towing their camper.
Yeah, exactly, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Well, a fifth wheel camper. I mean,
Right, sure.
That's really what.
So that was our dilemma. I certainly appreciate and understand the committee's dilemma as well, because no, I would not want it myself. But, you know, as Mr. Kramer stated, he had a 350 that was at 12.
Have you looked around at the surrounding communities and try to talk to some of your colleagues and see how they're handling? Because you're obviously not, they're all similarly situated. So as the technology increases, every town is dealing with this issue, I would think.
If it's enforced, they're dealing with the issue. You know, when I was told that there was a neighboring community that was 8,000, and it's a farming community, I don't see how that's enforceable. You can't enforce it. You'd have a full-time code enforcement officer writing tickets for 250s that are parked in.
Well, what I'm not hearing is alternatives to dealing with this outside of the weight, characterizing the prohibition based on weight. Maybe there's something to be said for looking around at surrounding communities throughout the state and seeing, are there any other vehicles that are being proposed to deal with this, and as a way to circumscribe what will be permitted and what will not outside of the GB gross vehicle weight rating.
Tom, you weren't at our last meeting when we had a lot of the dialogue from the residents.
No, sir.
Would it make sense to, and you've actually, and you know some of the folks that we heard from, I'm assuming.
Yes, sir.
Would it make sense to kind of have a meeting with them, you and Doug, perhaps?
I have attempted to on how many occasions, Doug?
Okay.
At least 6 or 7.
I would say at least 6 or 7 to please meet with myself and Mr. Kramer. And every time it's been refused.
Okay, would it go farther if one of us were part of that discussion? My point is that my thought was if we collectively worked together with the residents that had raised the question to create an ordinance that works, why not try it?
I'm all for creating an ordinance that works, absolutely. I was basically at,
I don't doubt that, I'm
Yeah.
just collectively with the residents that raised the questions. Because I think that way you have, you know, collectively, I keep saying that tonight, but the residents that raise the questions to us and representation from the municipality could collectively put together an ordinance that would work. I'm not saying I'm volunteering for that position, by the way, but Sandy might.
Well, do we know, are any other towns regulating these vehicles on criteria other than weight?
not to my knowledge. You can't say necessarily commercial license plate because
Yeah, people drive their vehicle.
people drive their vehicle home, or that's what they do. If you're a plumber, you drive your, we have numerous plumbers in town that operate out of their residence. We have numerous electricians that operate in
See,
town.
that's another whole issue though, right?
Right.
Yep.
And, you know, you are deciding what your town looks like, so you want to be very careful on
Yep.
these issues because they have lasting impact.
Absolutely.
Can we,
Of course.
can we get the ordinance from the surrounding towns? Let's see what Medford, what they have, Southampton, Tremont.
Evesham, Woodland.
We're going the gamut, I could just tell you. Woodland has none. That I know personally. I was informed that Southampton's was 8,000 pounds. So
But you're not sure.
I'm not sure, no. I'm only reporting on what I heard in that video from the gentleman that said that
And
it
I
was
wonder
no enough.
if more well-developed towns ordinances like Mount Laurel, like Evesham, Lumberton might have other criteria other than weight or other indicia that they utilize to regulate that issue.
I think Medford Lakes, Peter, if I'm not mistaken, they restrict commercial vehicles.
That's exactly right.
None.
None.
No commercially tagged vehicles.
No commercially tagged vehicles,
Yeah.
which I don't know if this committee wants to go that direction. If they do, that's fine. I don't, you know, it was my understanding that's not where this,
Yeah, we were looking for, you know, what you wanted to do made sense, right? The gross of the vehicles are going up, and you came up with a number and you put a stake in the ground, and others said, that number's too high,
right.
that you're gonna have these type of vehicles. But then, as a committee, you know, where do we restrict somebody in the size vehicle they can have? Clearly, there's gotta be a limit, but because of, you know, people don't drive just F-150s no more, or 250s.
Well, if you remember, my concern is that you're gonna have people running a commercial business out of their residence by upping the, you know, the GVW. That's my biggest concern.
That's
I
hard
mean-
for town to enforce that.
I mean, it's one thing for, you know, you work for a company and you bring the vehicle home, that's one thing, you're, you know, but I'm afraid you're gonna have people running a business, an unregistered business in the township, because they now have the capability to do it.
So do you look at non-commercial tagged vehicles allowed then? Do you go that far?
No, I'm not saying that.
Because the people are working for another company that have offices somewhere else, may come home in a vehicle that meets these every other standards and have a commercial tag on it.
I know. Like you do.
I'm one of them.
You're one of them.
I'm one of them. Because I don't know if I'm gonna be working in North Jersey or if I'm gonna be working all the way down to Maryland.
And really, the commercial
Day to day.
tag isn't dispositive of the impact that the vehicle has. It's the weight, it's the type of vehicle that has the impact, so.
So do you make the list that it is, do you drop the weight down to 16,000?
If we drop the weight down to 16,000, you would then exclude the 450 series and the 4500 series.
Okay.
And then what happens to the person that has a 450 that tows their camper?
That was when Mr. Kramer and I, we went, it's a pickup. Based on what the manufacturer is saying, it's a pickup.
You got SUVs and
That,
past that.
and we're getting
You
to
got some
the,
old excursions that
we're getting to a 3/4 ton Suburban that
Right.
are pushing there. It's a very, you know,
Do you limit it to vans, SUVs, utility bodies, and pickup beds? and flatbeds.
That's an interesting way to look at it, yeah.
If your concern is having dump trucks and people either dumping off or box trucks, and you don't want box trucks there,
So if you're looking for another mechanism to regulate the activity, I would suggest that we survey surrounding towns. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If there's no other town that's aggressively come up with a resolution of this issue that we can learn from their experience, then maybe we have to start breaking it down that way, and Tom can suggest some language for me. Otherwise, maybe we can find a remedy that's been arrived at another jurisdiction.
You brought up a good point. Evesham, Mount Laurel, larger towns, they have residential communities, and I'm sure they get, they went through this probably way before we had.
Yeah, their residential communities actually have sidewalks.
Well, that's something I would think about.
Yeah,
is lighting.
we're a little different.
Yeah, you've got no lights on the street at all. Are you looking at a hazard? That scares me.
I just can't believe we're the first ones to tackle this issue. And we may benefit from others' experience if we looked around. I'm just not aware. And if we are, everybody's stuck in regulating gross vehicle weight, then maybe we talk about getting away from gross vehicle weight. We define a class of vehicle by way of cab and body type, and ask Tom to try to develop some language in that regard if he thinks that's viable.
or we go a weight for non-commercial vehicles and a weight for commercial vehicles. If you're worried about a personal pickup that's an F-450 that's 16, if it's on a personal tag, not a commercial tag, to be honest, most people aren't going to care. First of all, you're not going to get complained.
But from an enforcement standpoint, begs the question, what's the difference between whether it has a commercial tag on it or not?
Tom, you've heard. Go ahead.
How does that affect negatively, the zone scheme, the impact that it has?
One's commercial, one's business.
Tom, you've
Yeah,
heard a
but
That's
lot
not dispositive of
Just
how
drive
it
the
impacts the
commercial
neighbor,
truck.
right?
right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've heard a lot of dialogue amongst us. Obviously know the notes of the meeting. Do you want to take the opportunity to be able to take this back to the drawing board and look at the other municipalities as Pete suggested?
That's fine, I can
Come
do
to
that.
us.
That's certainly fine. I just wanted to give you the reasoning, once again, as to why the administrator and myself came up with that number was, we looked at pickups. And when you put Ford pickups in, it comes up either light duty or medium duty, and the medium duty goes up to a 450, and we went, all right, there's the number, 16.5, so we have to include that.
It was an arbitrary.
It was not an arbitrary decision. It was a very well thought out decision that we tried to basically say that we are a rural farming community, at least our heritage is such, and that we still have a lot of that, and awful lot of pickups in this town, that's for sure.
The problem is those 450s with that GVRW brings in a whole lot of other vehicles to the table.
It
which
sure
is-
does, but
Yeah.
as I said, if I have a 1996 Ford F-350 with a gross vehicle weight of 8,800 pounds.
But
The
if you-
technology advances.
But if you restrict it to pickup truck cabs and bodies, that kind of takes care of itself, right? You can have an F-550 that's a pickup truck, right?
That is not a pickup.
Actually,
So they
no.
don't put pickup beds on those?
But General Motors, or GMC, there was a Monroe built a pickup bed.
Here we go.
On a 6,500
On a
crew
side
cab truck.
Mayor, I think we have some direction. We gotta move on. Mayor, I think we gotta move on.
You're gonna do a little more research and work with the administrator and come up with some better wording on the ordinance?
That would be fine.
And hopefully we can get to a number that we can all agree on for Tabernacle Township.
That would be fine.
Anything else, Tom, you had?
I had heard there was some discussion on the fees, or there was questions, or,
It's just on for your second reading, right? Yeah, I think we answered that and moved those forward. That you would take a recommendation from the state and surrounding communities.
And not lose money.
well, at this point, my crystal ball was broken last week, so I don't know what the revenue will be at the end of the year, but certainly at the end of the year, when in conjunction with the CFO, get our numbers, we'll have a better idea as to where we are. As was stated before, the last fee revision was 2012. And it's been that long. Yeah, and literally, we were nowhere near what we needed to be. And so we had to put a tourniquet on it to stop the bleeding, and we'll evaluate, once we get at the end of the year and see where we're at.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
So do you have any agenda items you want to?
No, actually, we're going over.
Well, I think we had the budget. Do you have anything else other than the budget?
As far as CFO, no. I will remind everyone that TAA baseball is having opening day on Saturday. You're all invited to come watch. Cleanup day went great. I had more volunteers than I knew what to do with.
That's wonderful.
How many o'clock, sir?
10 o'clock
10 o'clock.
at Patty Good for
He's
Field.
throwing out the first pitch.
I haven't decided yet. My son's campaigning for it. but-
Is he?
Smokey Berry on?
Doug, you have anything for me?
Yes, I was asked to talk to Shimong about the Aaron Moore property, block 1401, lot 7. That was the piece that the building is partially in the right-of-way for the old Tucker Road dirt portion. Shimong, I took the Shimong administrator up there, we rode down the road, came out, looked at the property, had some discussion. She went to their township committee last Tuesday, and their feeling on it is that it shouldn't, if we wanted to abandon the right-of-way, they'd be willing to abandon theirs, provided there are no costs to the township. All legal and engineering costs be borne by Mr. Moore, and that they want, there's a block 36, lot 9, that must have a portion of that right-of-way left out near Carranza Road open so it has access to it. And they would want $1,000 for their half of the right-of-way. My feeling on our side is that if they agree and you agree, that we'd be fine to abandon that portion of the right-of-way, but for the same conditions that it not cost the township any engineering costs or legal, that Mr. Moore bear the cost of that. But I would also like to say, instead of us charging for the right-of-way, that he purchase an easement across the property behind him, so where the present road presently exists can become a legal right-of-way out to Carranza Road.
And what block and lot was that, Doug? That new easement was there?
Oh, I think it's 1401 6, I think.
So one to the west of him, right?
Northwest, yeah.
Northwest of him, okay. And how wide of the easement do you want?
I would say that we don't need the 66 foot that presently has. I would be satisfied with the 50 foot right away. Most of our roads have 49 or 50 foot, so.
So you're asking that the committee consider vacating our portion, our half of that road, if the applicant gets us an easement to get Tucker Road back onto Carranza Road.
Yes.
It covers all costs. and
Covers all.
Shimong's gonna want $1,000 as well.
Yeah.
Now, Peter, how would that work? Is that up to him to be the applicant to petition for the vacation of the roads?
Well, sure. You know,
Because he
anybody-
wants the property, right?
Yeah, anybody can come forward that has an interest in a right-of-way and ask the township to consider vacating that right-of-way. As we've explained before, when you vacate a right-of-way, from the center line of the right-of-way, it becomes the property of the adjoining property owners. The obstacle has always been up to here with respect to this issue, the effect on the ability of emergency services vehicles and forest fire to access the end of Tuckerton Road and make that connection in the event of an emergency or otherwise. Doug had indicated previously that from time to time, although he can't remember last when, he's been on that vehicle, other vehicles have been on that road, although it is a two-track road that's, hardly passable from what I understand. So this sounds like a reasonable accommodation that continues the public access through to the end of Tuckerton Road where it intersects with Carranza potentially, still allows that emergency vehicle access, or the Forest Fire Service access to the forest down the Tuckerton Road right away. Solves the problem for Mr. Moore, obtains the cooperation of Shamong, so I would applaud Doug for pursuing that and coming up with what appears to be a reasonable response to Mr. Moore.
It's 6.02 is the lot that we need the easement across.
You didn't have to take the administrator further down the road to show them how bad it is, did you?
We had some discussion. That leads me into the next time, if you're ready to move on, or how you feel about moving forward with this.
Committee in favor of having Doug approach Mr. Moore and request that he petition to get the road vacated, but secure an easement off the other property so that there is access off Tuckerton Road on the Carranza Road.
We can send him a letter, basically putting the terms forward.
Yeah, do we know who the owner of that other lot is that would be burdened by any new easement? Just out of curiosity.
Want this back? Trying to save data here.
Okay.
Was your favorite, Doug?
Huh?
Steve's in favor.
Trying to think.
I have to abstain.
Wasn't that part of the Haas property?
Okay.
No.
Doug, it's unanimous, you can move forward.
Okay.
What else you have?
I thought it was too.
They're
House there.
they're 2 lots up.
Yeah, but didn't they just sell 55 or?
That's in Shimon on the backside.
Oh, is it?
That one.
Yep.
Adelina Fairman. Fairman.
And that's a residential lot on it?
Last year.
No, I don't believe so. She owns 2 lots side by
Okay.
side. So I
The house
think,
on the hill, probably.
yeah, I think hers is the next lot with the house, and this is a vacant, about 6-acre lot.
Is it developable?
It's in the core. If they'd owned it long enough, they could probably get an exemption to put 1 house on it, maybe, with an innovative system. But not really marketable as multiple small lots, I don't believe.
Gotcha.
Why I was with the administrator and Shimon, we talked about where Shimon would be if the supplemental grant from the state didn't go through for the remaining of Carranza Road. And I'm in the process now of trying to schedule a meeting between Joe and their mayor with the administrative staff to try to see where they are in their grant applications to see when they would be applying. Right now, Dan's information is, I'm sure it's correct, I'm not sure how much they wanted to give us. They are not awarding those until closer to the end of the fiscal year.
Which is the end of June. So
So-
they said we should hear something by the end of June, but they won't give me any more information of that.
Okay. So we're,
So hopefully we'll get that meeting in the next week or two, Doug.
unfortunately, their mayor has had a death in the family last week, so he's finishing up that, and we'll be back probably sometime later this week. So we'll see what his schedule looks like, and we'll check, see if we can get everybody's schedule together. Okay. The ordinance for the part-time fire inspector, or I should say, we requested and you granted us the ability to go out and advertise for a part-time fire inspector. Unfortunately, I missed in our employment manual, I was looking at last year's employment manual where we had a fire inspector in the manual. And Sean brought to my attention that we had in our creation of the fire marshal had eliminated the previous fire inspector and the construction portion of that and made it a combined position. So we're going to have to, I'd like to introduce an ordinance to create the part-time fire inspector at the next meeting, and then finalize it at the May meeting, have the public hearing on that, and then go out to advertise in June for the position.
Okay, you okay with that, Doug? Steve? Steve? Okay. You're good, Doug.
Okay. Okay, we talked about court already. The order for the gazebo has gone out, and that is moving forward. They will send back a set of plans and agree for one final review before that is ordered. So that's all I have.
Okay. Steve, I'm going to jump out of order because somebody has to go.
No problem.
Oh, no, I'll wait.
You good?
Executive, yeah.
Okay, never mind. She's good.
First of all, I'm glad we're moving the meeting off of Easter Monday, so thanks for spearheading that discussion, because I wasn't going to be here. We were going to have it then, so I appreciate that. I just wanted to get the five of us to kind of think about this for a little bit in the next 2 weeks. We finally have a build-out plan from Verizon, which I was in Dan's office this week looking at street opening permits. The two of us were trying to play Sherlock Holmes to try to figure out what Verizon's doing. But the bottom line is that they're going to be building out between now and March of 2020, 893 homes, which is far and above beyond what we were entitled to, and what we're trying to aim for with folks who are part of the BFR program. The question I have for the committee, and it's something to think about over the next 2 weeks, is do we want to continue to pursue the BFR ruling and the BPU's ruling in terms of build out of the entire census tract? The BPU and the agreement that with Verizon that created this whole program, they're supposed to build out the entire census tract, which includes all of Tabernacle, all 2,100 homes. If we do that, it's going to require the same kind of legwork that I've been doing for the last 5 years, I guess, to try to get this program kicked off the ground. I'm not sure it'll be as hard, but my point is, do we want to look at spending time and energy to do that? If we do that, we are going to need to go through rate council in all likelihood, and Joe, you and I probably ought to talk about this at some point in detail, but we can either go through rate council or go through another attorney that's already been involved in litigation with Verizon, which would cost us money. The question is, do we want to fight for the other 1,100 families that already have broadband but don't have Verizon?
Okay.
Something
And when you think about that, think about the competition. Because now you have two vendors to choose from rather than one. And
Well, I understand what you're saying, and Steve and I discussed this briefly this morning. I believe our main concern, because the Board of Education brought it to our attention, that we had families in Tabernacle that didn't have access to internet. Have we reached that goal?
Yes.
So,
yeah, what Steve, I guess basically what he's saying, he's got us in the red zone.
mm-hmm.
And do we want to get the ball over the line for the other 100?
Right. All the people that you're referring to will have internet service by October. FiOS. The question is, do we want to go above and beyond? I can tell you geographically that no one on the west side of 206 is going to have any option for it. All the focus is on this side of 206 because they have to go past houses to get to houses that where it isn't, where you are. They have got to go down Carranza Road. So Carranza Road will have it all the way down to the prison. But there's no option from here up to 206. And based on the way the lines will go, it's also not going to be from Nixon's down to Bread and Cheese Run. So it bypasses the schools. They have internet connection now and whatnot, but that picks it up again going towards Joe's house along Fox Chase, and then it goes down back up Patty Boker. So My point is that it's piecemealed to get all of the people that they have to get by law. For the 100 people that spend $100 to get this done. Question is, do we want to spend the energy and the time to, as Joe said, to get the ball across the goal line with the entire municipality? Because legally they're supposed to do it. Question is, do we want to fight Verizon to do it through rate council or through a third attorney?
The rate council will enforce their own regulations as long as they meet the ones that don't have internet.
And rate council is, we're getting close to where I'd almost be more comfortable in executive.
Okay.
I will say this, that rate council has been very helpful, but it's just a matter of whether or not we want to continue to push.
I'll tell you from being involved with Steve and his father the last couple of years on this, I mean, it's a big effort that Steve and his father put together, and Stephen put together to push this where it is. Because way out there, we wouldn't be there. Verizon has literally fought them and us every inch of the way.
As recently as last week.
And made it very difficult.
Yeah.
Anything else, Steve?
No.
Sam, you have anything? Okay.
I just have a question for Tom. At the last meeting, it was brought up we were having some problems with the construction office and businesses. I think Joe mentioned something.
Actually, Doug and I addressed that after the meeting,
Okay.
but thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, the only thing I had is, we agreed on the resolution supporting the school on the funding that they did not receive, and we sent a draft around. I did sign that, and we'll move forward with that. Also, Glenn and I had spoke about a joint letter going out to the residents of Tabernacle Township and basically inform them what's going on with the state and the state aid. And what I'd like to do is get permission from this committee to draft that letter with the superintendent, and we'll circulate it. And I'd like to sign that and get that to the residents of Tabernacle Township so they know what's going on. Anybody opposed to that? Okay. It'll be a joint letter from the school board and from this committee, basically just educating the residents of why their taxes are going up. And
Did you get any feedback from like you're saying, the other letter, that's being sent out to the other municipalities?
No, I did not send anything out to the other municipalities yet, Joe.
Okay.
I was in Trenton last week, and I did spend some time with the Speaker of the House, or I'm sorry, Senate President Steve Sweeney. And he has his own plan. I'm going to forget the name of it, so I'm not going to name it, but he actually has a plan that they've been working on, and he's going around the state. He's basically looking to consolidate school districts, is what he's looking to do. And also align core curriculum with high schools so that all the grammar schools are lined up with the high schools they go to.
They've been talking about that for the past 2-3 years.
Yeah. Okay. That's all I have. Peter, you said
Mayor, we had an executive session scheduled on the Eric's Causeway issue. The task is to select and award a contract to a appraiser. At the last meeting, the committee wasn't satisfied with the specifics concerning this particular project and what the actual cost might be. We did ask them to come back and get to us with those proposals. We did get a call towards the end of the week, Renwick and Associates, asking us for more time to submit further information. I also, in looking at what has been provided, think that those cost proposals are a little aggressive, and I would appreciate the opportunity to go back and ask them to sharpen their pencil and talk to them a little bit more about the expected scope, point out to them that there's only 2 properties that are adjoining that we're talking about here. It's a small portion of rural road, and induce them to potentially provide a more beneficial proposal with respect to the overall expected cost.
So you want to give them a more defined scope of work of what we're really looking at?
Well, your clerk had forecast for me that I might be a little ambitious in trying to have this listed for executive session tonight, but I wanted to try to get the information and advance it tonight. We don't have enough information, I think, concerning what the exact proposal would be as far as a static cost, and I think I can get them to do that, given the scope of the project.
So we're gonna delay a closed session.
If you're so
Executive
inclined,
session.
yeah.
Is everybody okay with Peter pursuing and give a better definition of what we're looking for and get those proposals, and then we'll move it forward in a future meeting. Okay, at this time, we're gonna take public comment. If anybody would like to comment, LaShawn, where do you need them to stand so you can hear?
There's fine. Pick it up really quick.
Okay. Mr. Lemire?
So we're staying back under here under this one, or are we gonna
You're
talk
good.
loud?
Let's pick it up just.
All right. Well, I just want to say, love the format, quite frankly, very informative. It really was, it was great to see everybody.
Who'd you say you were?
What's that? Oh, Mark Lemire, 32 Washington Way, I'm sorry. But I love the format, like I said, it's just that the normal meetings are just so sterile, so it's just really good to see the sausage being made, if you will. So appreciate everybody's efforts on that, but nice to see everybody out in a very open and engaging format. So that's all. Thanks.
Mr. Brooks?
Thank you. I have 4 comments. One, there was,
Who are you?
I'm sorry, Stuart Brooks, Morris Meadow Road. My apologies on that. First question, there was mention of the budget including money for the purchase of iPads, and I see Mr. Boyd uses one, but I know that many people on the committee don't even use email. So the question is, how are the iPads thought to be used, and how many are we anticipating buying? Second question, there was a comment, I think it was in Ms. Berger's 16 points regarding funding for TAA, and a comment was made in response to her question about how we do fund TAA, and I was unsure, or it was unclear to me, how we fund TAA and how much. So I appreciate a little explanation of how we do that and what it costs. Third, there was comment regarding the capital items. I think, Mr. Haynes, this was yours, regarding $65,000 budgeted for a $1.3 million expenditure. Those are the numbers that I remember coming up more than once. It was unclear to me what those numbers were for, and I'm hoping that you could clarify what those numbers are and what they're for and how that fits into the proposed budget and spending plan. Last, the format has its advantages, but I will say that when people start talking to their neighbors in a question-answer kind of format, especially with people who are not facing the audience, it is hard to hear. And I thought that the proposed solution was to arrange the tables in a horseshoe. I see that hasn't happened, and perhaps you could clarify whether that is to be done. And if it's not to be done, is there some way, and Committeeman Lee and Mr. Kramer, I'm not picking on you, just that you guys tend to be more soft-spoken than, say, Mr. Haynes, Mr. Yates.
It's funny you say that, but I've heard the exact opposite. I've heard the exact opposite. I'm loud, make a lot of noise, so thank you for the compliment.
That was an April Fool's joke.
No,
No, it wasn't.
that's how it appears to me. I'm sitting in the front row, and believe me, you guys.
Do you ever think maybe your hearing's going?
That could be too, but I'm sitting in the front row, and I ought to be able to hear what you have to say. I mean, I couldn't get any closer unless it was actually sitting in the middle. I'm sure that would be a distraction to everyone.
Stuart, thank you for your comments. I specifically want to thank you for your comments. And I will do my darndest to make sure you hear anything I talk.
Are we going to rearrange the table to a horseshoe?
I hope not. So I like this.
Maybe we'll just have you sit over here, Doug. We'll consider it.
Or my problem.
Anyone else from the public, and then we'll respond.
I think we'll do township meetings like that.
Like this, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, Frank.
Fran Brooks, Moore's Meadow. A few things. These Oprah costs. Who are you planning to hire? Who are you thinking of hiring? We have an attorney. We have a tenured clerk. We're a town of 7,000 people. We get under 100 Oprah requests. Why do we need any more help? You hired a deputy, a woman, Ms. Lewis, I should say, with a very thin resume. I looked at all the resumes that you received when you advertised for that position, and you had some really talented people there, yet you chose her. And the people in with those resumes had more than enough talent and experience to do any Oprah work. And so I don't know why you didn't do that in the first place. Plus, I just think that you need more training, and Mr. Lang should be doing a better job, frankly, in all due respect, Peter, with regard to Oprah issues. You should be responding to Oprah issues. You should be responding appropriately, which I would argue you, at least with regard to me, are not responding appropriately. So, and my record is pretty clear with the township. It's 08, and it's time to start providing documents that are clearly public documents. They're not, the documents that I request are really not complicated documents. There's very little, if any, issues regarding them. So I don't know what the problem is as far as responding, but I think you have enough people. You don't need any more money. I think you need to do the job, and that's my comment about that. We do pay TAA. We do pay for TAA's insurance. I've submitted an Oprah to see if there's anything else we're picking up, but maybe Mr. Haynes can provide information on that. It's time for TAA to actually become self-supporting. It took multiple years to get the squad to pay its insurance. It's time for TAA to pay its insurance. In all due respect, Mr. Haynes, I know you're heavily involved, and it has nothing to do with the organization and what you do. It has to do with fairness to the taxpayers. You still have no needs analysis for Sequoia or for anything in this township. That Franzen report is not a needs analysis, and yet you keep going around and around. And I think Mr. Yates said that. You're just chasing your tail if you're going to talk about the school. And I think that Mr. Lee makes legitimate points about that. You need to get a real needs analysis, and you don't have one. And you just keep running around chasing your tail, and I don't know what the problem is. I really don't. As for the TRS, I don't know what, I know you referred to the TRS $16,000 increase as for balance billing, but if it's 12,000, it's 12,000. Are we paying for them to do transports in other townships, just like we're still doing for Chemung? The Chemung residents are getting free transports while we pick up the cost, while Tabernacle Township residents pick up the cost. What other townships are being lumped in to that $16,000 increase? Nobody's asking the questions. There's no belt tightening taking place. You're just doing you're like robots when it comes to these issues. And the other thing that I want to mention to you is that had you been discussing the weight vehicle issue, and you know, your agenda doesn't say that you're going to be talking about the GVR issue. Had you put it on the agenda, then people maybe who came to the meeting who Mr. Boyd is having problems with or dealing with this issue with may have shown up at the meeting and gotten an education that actually should have been discussed at the first workshop meeting. You also don't have minutes for 3 months. That I'm going to say, Mr. Lang, this is your responsibility. That is 3 months. There's a 30-day, you're in violation of OPMA. You should have minutes within 30 days, and that's published case law. Now, why you don't know that yet, and excuse me, just give me the minute, why you do, no one knows that yet. The clerk is not providing the minutes. The minutes are getting tabled from January, and yet Mr. Lang sits here quietly and doesn't advise you that you need to have the minutes within 30 days, okay? That is a clear OPMA, Open Public Meetings Act violation, and you've been doing it. Generally speaking, LaShawn's been great about the minutes, but when you have violations, you just continue them, and you do not provide the minutes. So it's time, we don't need another deputy clerk to do Oprah work. Mr. Lang needs to do his job.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public? Chief Jackson?
Chief Jackson, Tabernacle Rescue Squad. The quarterly report for the rescue squad is due tonight. So I wanted to take the opportunity to just provide you the numbers that are in the contract.
Would you like to come back in 2 weeks?
It will literally take me a minute here.
I just thought I'd give you an opportunity.
You had 3 minutes.
Ready? Start the clock. So, from January 1st to March 31st, we responded to 245 calls. Our type of emergency calls were 7 fires, 15 MVAs, 104 medical emergencies, that's kind of a catch-all. 4 overdoses, 21 respiratories, 6 cardiac arrests, 16 cardiac emergencies, 11 unconscious, 5 traumas, 7 strokes, 6 standbys, 4 rehab assignments, 17 psychiatrics, and 35 falls. Our volunteers logged 4,922.5 hours. Our average response time was 4.18 minutes. We provided mutual aid to Southampton 29 times, to Chemung 5, to Woodland twice, to Medford 4 times, and Pemberton once. We did receive mutual aid once in the past 3 months. It was from Chemung, and it was during a time where we had 3 calls dispatched simultaneously. We served or transported 139 patients, 88 to Mount Holly, 23 to Marlton, 18 to Voorhees, 5 to Deborah, 3 to Lords Burlington County, 2 to Cherry Hill. We did completed 2 standbys, the robotics tournament at Seneca, and for the New Jersey Forest Fire Service or PAC test, each standby was 2 days. Special events that we had in the first quarter of the year, we are the charter organization for the Boy Scouts. We saw another Eagle Scout, Micah Livornia, and we did 2 tours, one for Girl Scout Troop 23030 and 23165. They were tours of the building and training for their, I was a Boy Scout, so it was merit badges. I don't know what it's called for the Girl Scouts, but for work towards their training, towards earning their things. So that's my report for the Tabernacle Rescue Squad.
Submit that in writing?
Yeah, we're a little busy this weekend, so I have my notes here. I'll put this in a much neater format and submit it to LaShawn, so you guys can have copies.
Thank you for keeping us safe.
And then on the gross vehicle weight thing, trucks, personal vehicles, somebody who tows an RV, get a 450 to tow their RV, it's their personal vehicle, it could exceed that GVW. So with the commercial vehicles, like for instance, somebody who is a plumber or, works for a contractor and they bring their truck home from work, maybe the ordinance should limit the number of commercial vehicles allowed parked in a residential zone, as far as you're only allowed to have 1 on your property. Maybe that, with that 17,000 pound weight, would probably, listen, you're never going to write an ordinance that's going to cover everything. There's always going to be a truck that's going to be under, or there's going to be a truck that's going to be over. But I think if you say 1 commercial vehicle, that would prevent people from running a business out of their house, or a large business out of their residence, parking a bunch of commercial vehicles there. And if it's somebody who has a large RV, triaxle, 5th wheels, they get those big Freightliner trucks and tow all over the country, and now you're going to tell me that my truck that I use to tow my RV, I can't park at my house. So I think if it's a personal thing, maybe there should be a little bit more leeway if it's strictly for that use, an RV or a personal use. So, thank you.
Thanks for the comments, Chief. Anyone else in the public?
Mayor, just one thing I wanted to add. Tabernacle Rescue Squad and also the Tabernacle Fire Company had coverage down in Chatsworth during the fire last weekend. I just wanted to publicly say appreciate the support there. It was a scary time for those folks who are down that neck of the woods, so thanks for...
And that guy said next year, I think he was in the frozen, wasn't it?
No,
Slightly.
Huh?
Slightly. 2 days work.
Okay, we're going to close the public portion. We'll address some of the questions we had. Rodney, we had one about TAA.
Yeah, regarding TAA, my comment was regarding the line item for the recreation OE line. I said nothing is paid to TAA from that line. I do not deny that the insurance is covered through the township and that TAA makes a contribution back to the township for any participants that are non-Tabernacle residents. As far as the capital improvement plan, the $65,000 is the amount of a down payment that would be required if we entertain a capital ordinance this year. That would be enough to cover $1.3 million worth of capital appropriations, just the down payment. It's, so.
Are we contemplating $1.3 million of capital appropriation?
Well, we may be, but right now, it's, if you don't have the money in a budget, you won't have the down payment, so then we wouldn't have any capital appropriations. If we don't have the down payment money available, we can't contemplate anything.
And as far as there was a question about iPads or computers, I think it's something we're still considering as a committee, Doug. Yes, it needs further discussion between the five of us of what we feel we need and how we can go about doing our.
We've talked about
duty as elected
communication.
official. Yeah.
We've talked about communication, and that was just one of the options that was out there, and we wanted to cover that cost if you chose to go that way.
Can you respond to the Oprah statements made as far as, and our minutes? I know LaShawn has minutes she circulated that are going to be released at the next meeting. And the intention was not to do minutes at these meetings, at the workshops, but do them at the committee meetings. But if we need to do them at this meeting, we certainly could do them.
Well, the law requires that LaShawn provide the minutes promptly to the public, and I think she does a reasonably good job at that, and we'll continue to do that, to provide the minutes in a timely way. The executive session minutes have been the subject of significant discussion. We have a committee that's meeting regularly to make sure that those executive session minutes are not held back any longer than is necessary. And that would be my comment.
Okay. And all I want to say about Oprah request, when you submit an Oprah request and you don't agree with the request, there is another avenue rather than just go into a lawsuit, right? You can go through a mediation procedure in the state of New Jersey. And I would encourage anyone in this township, if they want to help us reduce costs, is to go through that mediation procedure before entering into a suit.
That is a wonderful idea.
Sure it is.
Well,
Sure it is.
I think that it should be said that, and the
Just shouldn't
public should
break all the
know,
documents.
that as far as I understand the committee and my experience with the committee, they're absolutely, and the staff are absolutely committed to an open government, to provide whatever and all government documents are available to the public. There's never a desire to hold anything back or secret any documents. They work diligently, in my experience, to do the best they can. And I would indicate to the public that should there be any discontent, any level of dissatisfaction with any particular request or any type of response, that we be given an opportunity to address that, rather than embarking on litigation or even a mediation, because none of that is necessary. The township and its staff wants to enthusiastically comply with the Open Public Records and Open Public Meetings Act. And I don't think 201, there's anybody in this room that quarrels with the merit of those statutes and the goals and objectives of those statutes. So sometimes there is a dispute or a debate over a particular procedure, documentation, and we're happy to talk about it. We're happy to try to resolve it. If it turns out after some reasonable discussion that there's an impasse, then at least we know where we disagree, and we can seek to have those disagreements a dispute resolution process for those. But yeah, there is the Government Record Council, and anybody who feels aggrieved under the Open Public Records Act has an ability to go to the Government Records Council and ask that they get involved with both sides, and they'll try to mediate and bring this dispute to a remedy that's acceptable to the parties. And they don't give up any right to go and file a litigation should that redress be unsatisfactory.
Okay. With that, motion to approve the bills.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. Motion to adjourn.
You got it.
All in favor? Good night. You were back there.
Peter, I think the most important point that you left out of your discussion, there are actually a couple important points that you left out. And that is, one, it doesn't matter whether you go to GRC or still free shipping. The costs are still there whether you go to GRC or Superior. You just get the litigation moves a whole lot faster if you go to Superior, right? So that's one of the important points. And as for actually, what I have found is that when I attempted I made some very strong efforts, and I have evidence of it in numerous lawsuits regarding documentation. Just plain public records. And we're still met with resistance. So it's nice, it's palliative for you to say those things to this committee, but the committee's not doing its work. And I don't think you're doing it. A much better job could be done when it comes to overall PMA. 3 months not having minutes, I mean, come on, you should be saying to your clerk, your client, you can't go 90 days because case law says 30 days. It's a 30-day turnaround. Promptly, it's been litigated multiple times, and it's these are published cases. So you put yourself into jeopardy when you don't have to the actions that are, or lack of actions taking place. And I don't hear it. I just don't hear the need. I'd love to hear it.
I'll take those criticisms to heart, and I'll try to
every once in a while get really
improve.
Well, can I tell
You don't need
that's the person you are. I thought maybe you were joking.
The overwork is so standard.
It's soft voice. I'm telling you, I just about fell off my chair.
Most of the, in fact, it's mostly the title companies that are really
Side by side,
lots
you
and
get
lots
like a
of documents.
conversation like
And
this.
because this township and many other townships opposed modifying, making modifications to existing law, you guys can't charge, just like for other public agencies, cannot charge those commercial entities all the time, effort, and time, and resources that are associated with all that commercial work. Okay, so the opposition to, I mean, it's like shooting yourself in the foot. All these entities coming out against changes, they didn't want to work on the changes. They didn't want to, they just wanted, it was a zero-sum game with all the opposition from the league, from the Arts Association. It was robotic responses instead of really looking at the legislation and saying, hey, you know, we do need to make a change in that area because when you look at all the opens that are coming in, they're mostly commercial, there's a lot of commercial requests. And that's what people maybe should pay the cost for those associated with okay? So all these municipalities just shot themselves in the foot for no reason because they object to it.
The true premise is that, you know, these are public records and they need to be available to the public. So I don't reject that at any level. So I take criticisms to heart and see what we can do to do a better job.
Better training, lots of courses, better training. Don't withhold records. It's crazy. It's just crazy.
Well, thank you, and you have a good evening.
Okay, you too.
If you do one commercial vehicle, you can put a weight limit on it. But maybe if it's a guy that works for, he could be driving a 550. He's driving a service truck, he's driving a 550. Here's the point.
What is a brush truck?
Well, they're 350.
But a new 350.
Right.